The sirens reached Dr. Arden Vale before the ambulance did, a thin, wavering thread pulled taut across the winter night, vibrating in the bones of the county hospital like a warning note you only hear when you've been listening too long. She stood at the glass doors of the emergency department with a lukewarm coffee in her hand, counting the seconds between the Doppler rise and the turn onto Birch Street. 31, 32, the rhythm of triage lived inside her now, as fixed as the small scar on her right thumbnail from a broken ampoule. A wind scraped the parking lot and carried the smell of creosote from the railroad ties west of town, and Arden pushed through the doors because whatever was coming would need gloves, light, calm hands. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. The ambulance hit the bay like a thrown hammer. Sleet hissed on the roof. Jorge, the paramedic with the clipboard that never left his hand, was already talking while the back doors swung wide and cold air flooded the corridor. Single rider, Highway 91, laid it down avoiding a jackknifed pickup. Helmeted. Tacky to 130. Left chest bruising, decreased breath sounds. We got a line and a SAT at 88 on room air, came up to 93 on non-rebreather. 10 of morphine in the field. Arden's hands were moving before she spoke. Trauma Bay 2. Hello, sir, I'm Dr. Vale. I'm right here. The rider's leathers were blackened along the left side as if someone had painted them with asphalt. Blood had dried in a trellis behind his ear. His eyes, an improbable winter sky blue, tried to focus and failed. Name, she asked, while Maya, nurse, rock of the unit, cut the jacket away. The biker's chest lifted unevenly, the left side lagged, the skin already blooming with the bruised geometry of broken ribs. Cade, he rasped. Cade Moretti. The syllables were pebbles in his throat. All right, Cade. Stay with me. On my count, we roll. The team turned him as one, gel pads squeaking, Arden's fingers mapping vertebrae, scapulae, the long run of the lat. The spine felt clean under her gloves, thank God. When they settled him, the pulse ox chattered a warning. Breath sounds? Right present. Left minimal, Maya said. Needle him, Arden said. Second intercostal, midclavicular. She watched the puncture, waited for the hiss of air, felt the room exhale with it. Bright red oxygenation crept back onto the monitor as if embarrassed by its lateness. Cade squeezed his eyes shut and then opened them to her face. Don't call anyone, he said. The police sat between them like an unattended instrument. Focus on breathing, Arden said gently. What hurts the most? He tried to smile. Left everything. They stabilized the pneumo, started fluids, sent blood. The portable X-ray crackled to life, a ghost at the foot of the bed. Images spilled across the monitor, broken ribs like storm-felled fence slats, a clavicle fracture with a will of its own, a sternum that had considered cracking and decided against it. No head bleed she could see now, praise be to all the gods of Saturday nights. CT when he's stable, she told Maya. We'll serially check the pneumo. If it reaccumulates, we'll put in a chest tube. Cade tried to speak again, a cough rattled him. I can pay, he said. Just, not tonight. Arden heard the shape of the worry behind the words and recognized its species. Insurance. The country's quietest tourniquet, cutting off flow long before blood ever reached the wound. She had delivered babies whose mothers whispered the same fear. She had discharged men who were still febrile because they'd done the math on a 3-day admission and decided fever was cheaper than debt. You're in my ER, she said. People don't owe me proof of solvency to bleed. His eyes met hers again, clearer now under the O2. You don't know who I am. It's an emergency department, not a census, Arden said. We'll find out what you need in your chest, then we'll deal with names. Names dealt with themselves, in truth. 10 minutes later, when Maya stepped into the hallway to phone respiratory, a young officer from the county sheriff's office sidled up to the nurse's station. His collar still shone with rain. That the biker from the pileup? Yes, Maya said. Do you need to take a statement? The officer cleared his throat and lowered his voice. "We got a call. He's with," he looked for a word that didn't get used in press releases. "A club. There's chatter that some of them are headed this way. Just so you know." Maya's eyes flicked to Arden through the glass. Arden didn't look away from the ultrasound image she was coaxing across Cade's chest, the gliding of pleura, the way it should look when a lung behaves, but she knew the look on Maya's face without seeing it, a tilt of humorless resignation. As if saying, "Of course tonight." The county hospital was a square of tired light in a town no one had built on purpose. Railroads had pulled it into being and then left it to endure like a campfire someone forgot to stomp out. They were forever on the wrong side of grants, of budgets, of supply lists that migration patterns mocked. The mayor liked to say they were scrappy. Arden preferred precise words. They were underfunded. When Cade's CT returned, Arden followed its gray story along the corridor like a pilgrim studying stained glass. The pneumothorax remained, a thin, stubborn shadow. The ribs were fractured but aligned enough to treat with pain control and prayer. The spleen, thank mercy, shone uninjured. The clavicle would grumble for weeks but mend. She returned to the room with a plan and the particular kind of courage hospitals require at 3:40 a.m., the courage to keep doing the next right thing while paperwork gathered on the counters like snowdrifts. "We're going to place a small tube between your ribs," she explained softly. "It will let the air escape and the lung re-expand. It hurts, and I'm sorry for that, but it will help you breathe. I'll give you more medicine." Cade nodded once. "Do what you gotta do, document." When Arden prepped the site, she saw the tattoos clearly for the first time, a wheel with wings inked on the pectoral, a band of block letters circling his upper arm, a skull flanked by lightning bolts peeking from the edge of the ruined jacket on the floor. She understood then why the officer had checked his voice. The symbols wrote a biography she didn't need to read to treat. The chest tube slid home with the soft, awful pop of breached membrane. Cade groaned, then sighed, a deep sound like a door opening in a house that had been sealed for years. Oxygen numbers climbed. The monitor settled as if someone had shaken it until sense fell into the correct slots. "Good," Arden said, and meant it. She watched his lashes settle on his cheek as the medication took hold. A man only looks like a boy when he's sleeping in an ER. "Admit to step down?" Maya asked. Arden stared a second at the board. "We're full." "We are always full," Maya said. "Are you quoting scripture?" "Observation bed, then," Arden said. "Call upstairs. I'll page ortho about the clavicle and respiratory about incentive spirometry." And she glanced out toward the waiting room. The officer had been right. Figures in wet leather had started to appear past the metal detector, not loud or swarming, just there, like weather blowing in. "And maybe let security know we will have company." Maya's mouth flattened into a line. "Keep them calm. Keep everyone calm. We're not a stadium." Arden pulled off her gloves and stepped into the hallway, pulse already quickening with the old, unwelcome index of possibilities, fights, shouting, someone filming on a phone, nurses asking why, administrators asking who would pay for the broken benches. The men in the waiting area surprised her. They were quiet. They sat. They took up space the way a storm front does, full of its own gravity, impossible to ignore, but they did not push. When one of them looked up and met Arden's eyes, he nodded once with the solemnity people reserve for funerals and flag raisings. "Doctor," he said, and his voice was the raspy quiet of someone who'd ridden too many miles. "Is he alive?" "He is." Arden kept her own voice steady. "He's hurt, but he's stable. He needs rest and time." The man exhaled, a gust surrendering one held breath. "Good. We'll keep it peaceful." He shifted and she saw the patch on his back when the leather moved, a skull with wings and a script that childhood television had taught her to fear. She swallowed and reminded herself that patches were not vitals, that insignia didn't intubate or arouse. People did. "Visitation is limited," she said. "One at a time. And masks still, please." He nodded, and to her astonishment the whole room obeyed the small, ordinary order like it was a commandment. Boxes of blue masks emptied and refilled with the awkward ballet of men who didn't do delicate tasks often. Someone in the corner tapped a wet boot against an evidence of patience. Arden turned when the sliding doors sighed open. The hospital administrator stepped in with his tie already in disapproval formation. Charles Lafferty was the kind of man who measured compassion in units of liability. Arden had learned his tells early. She'd learned everyone's tells. In an emergency department you listen for frequencies beyond speech. "I heard," he said, peering over Arden's shoulder as if expecting to see a riot blossoming from the vinyl. "Is this a publicity stunt or a siege?" "It's a waiting room," Arden said. "A man is hurt." "There are 30 of them," Lafferty hissed. "We don't have the staff for a parade. And there's the matter of billing." He always said billing like it was a neighbor's dog that wouldn't stop barking. Arden felt the old anger flicker. She tamped it down the way you turn a burner off with one precise twist. He needed a chest tube to breathe. "Chest tubes are not cheap," Lafferty said, as if that fact had once saved a drowning child. "If this patient cannot demonstrate coverage, we will have to. We will have to practice medicine," Arden said. "For which we have licenses, not price tags." He didn't say the next words, but Arden could feel them move through the air like the sides of a box. "We will have to discipline you," he was thinking. "We will have to write you up. We will have to make examples." She looked at his hands and saw that he was clutching a manila folder so tightly it had creased into an arch. "Keep them controlled," he said at last, and retreated 2 steps when one of the men rose to stretch, as if respect were a contagious disease. Arden returned to Cade's bedside. He slept. The ventilatory bellows of deep, medicated rest lifted and fell under the sheet. The chest tube whispered to itself in the suction apparatus. The night edged toward an unsteady dawn. In those slim hours when the body count of a city resets, bars empty, highways exhale, babies choose to enter or not, Arden did what she always did when the monitors quieted. She wrote notes with the careful completeness she'd once teased herself for, because notes were the afterlife of medicine. You write for the hands that come after your own. You tell the next doctor what you saw, what you feared, what you refused to fear. Her pen paused when Cade stirred and blinked. "My bike," he whispered. "Scraped, but the tow got it," Arden said. "The highway patrol called. They have your plate in your helmet. You did well wearing it." He nodded, eyes glassing with gratitude more fragile than bone. "Document," he swallowed. "I don't have insurance. And they won't, places won't," he gestured vaguely toward all the rooms in the world that closed when money stayed outside. "We treated you because you were dying," Arden said in a tone she reserved for truths that could not be negotiated. "We'll work the rest as we can. One thing at a time. I won't put you in a spot," he said. "My brothers," he caught the word in his teeth and held it. He glanced toward the door, toward the silhouettes that kept vigil in blue masks like unfamiliar birds. "They don't forget. I'm more interested in your oxygen saturation than your memory," Arden said. "Rest." He slept. Morning slipped a pale wrist through the blinds. The night shift changed into the day with the ritual exchanges that held the hospital together, stories passed with vitals attached, jokes carried like amulets. Outside, the waiting room had changed, too. It had multiplied. Arden didn't hear the bikes. She felt them in the soles of her feet first, a long, low thunder, then everyone heard them because everyone hears a procession. A line of motorcycles curved into the lot like a black river out of winter. Police cruisers arrived on the periphery with their lights off in the strange way law enforcement has of being conspicuous in attempting invisibility at the same time. Lafferty reappeared with a new tie and an older panic. "Absolutely not," he said to the glass, as if the doors would obey him. "We cannot have hundreds of, in the atrium." "They're outside," Maya said, reading from a window the way sailors read weather. "They're lining up." And she squinted. "Are those flatbeds?" Arden stepped closer. 2 semi-trucks idled at the mouth of the drive. A forklift materialized from some corner of reality she did not control. Men, no, people, because she noticed women among them now, hair braided under helmets, were climbing down from bikes with the awkward grace of those who live partly on machines and partly in bodies. They wore patches, some of them, and jackets without patches, and the expression that attends grief and purpose in equal measures. The first pallet came off the flatbed and rolled toward the loading bay as if this were a normal morning when shipments arrive on time and budgets exist as numbers rather than apologies. The crate was stenciled in black, Autovent 3100A. Arden blinked because the number was one she knew from catalog pages she skimmed late at night the way other people browse houses they cannot buy. "What is this?" Lafferty whispered, which was what men ask when their favorite language, money, begins speaking in tongues. A rider in a faded denim vest stepped forward from the crowd and raised a hand in a gesture both military and neighborly. He removed his gloves. The tattoos on his knuckles spelled a word Arden could not read until he turned his hand, then it said mercy. He looked directly at Arden as if he'd been introduced to her at some point in a life that ran parallel to hers and occasionally crossed at stoplights. "Dr. Vale," he called, his voice carrying over the muted engines. "Kate told us you worked." He nodded toward the pallets now appearing like gifts at the lip of a stage. "We heard your hospital's been making do with last decade. We thought we could fix a decade." Around him, men and women in leather and denim began to lift the lids off crates. White foam spilled like snow. Machines glinted the way clean things do when you're used to stained. Arden saw portable monitors, infusion pumps still fat with instruction manuals, wrapped EKG leads like coils of tamed lightning. A crate marked mobile ultrasound hummed within itself as if eager to be plugged in and told a heart. "How many?" Maya breathed. 400 bikes, said a voice near Arden's elbow, the young deputy from the night. He'd taken his hat off without noticing. "Maybe more. I've never seen anything like," he stopped, words unable to lift the weight of the morning. Lafferty found his footing in the only terrain he could imagine. "We cannot accept, we need provenance, receipts, chain of custody, we need assurances of." "People are breathing in there," Arden said without raising her voice. "We need ventilators." A woman stepped out of the line, older than Arden, the kind of older that doesn't apologize for itself. She set a box on the ground, opened it, and lifted a blood pressure cuff as if presenting bread. A small patch on her sleeve read RN. She didn't say where she had worked, only that she had. "Some of us used to be your kind," she told Arden. "Some of us are still. We put calls out. Donations came. Cash came. Old bosses looked the other way. New bosses didn't have to. Nobody wants to watch a hospital drown." Arden stared at the forklift easing a ventilator toward the loading dock. Everything inside her wanted to pick up a wrench and a policy simultaneously. She thought of Lafferty's folder, of grant applications that vanished into the indifferent canyon of state websites, of the pediatric oxygen concentrator that had been held together last week with a twist tie and prayer. "Chain of custody can be written," she said. "Lives can't be rewritten." She signed a delivery sheet because someone put it in her hand, because pens appear like miracles when you decide to risk something. An engine idled. The sleet had stopped, and the smell of wet asphalt rose around them like a congregation. Back at Cade's bedside, she found him awake, eyes clearer. He'd heard the thunder like everyone else had. "You're gonna hate me," he whispered, half smiling. "I haven't had time," Arden said. He nodded toward the window where a seam of the day showed itself. "They're a handful. But when we tell them somebody did right by one of us, they don't half-step." He bit his lip. "Doc. I didn't want them to cause trouble. I told them, just leave you alone and let you work." "This isn't trouble," Arden said. She thought of the ventilators rolling down the hallway like surfboards from a better coast. She thought of the children's ward and its rattling nebulizers. "This is triage from the outside." A cough took him, shook the lines in the monitor and Arden's sense of a future unspooling suddenly faster. She steadied his shoulder until the spasm passed. "Breathe with me," she said softly. "In. Out. Good." Again. He obeyed, and the room admitted oxygen the way an apology admits light. When she stepped back into the corridor, Lafferty was waiting with a man in a suit she didn't recognize. He had a hospital badge on a lanyard with the word compliance printed in a school bus font. "Dr. Vale," the suited man said, "I need to advise you that accepting equipment without proper vetting places the hospital at risk. Liability exposure, safety standards, if any of these devices cause harm." "If not having them causes harm," Arden said, "do you file paperwork with God?" He blinked. "I'm not unsympathetic, but there are regulations." "I know them," Arden said. "I also know faces when they go blue." The man sighed in that way men sigh when they expect to be obeyed eventually. "Then we'll have to escalate this to the board." "Great," Arden said. "They can meet us in the loading dock. Bring clipboards. More pallets. More crates. More hands joining security and dietary and maintenance, because once a thing has momentum it recruits everyone in the vicinity to declare sides." Someone in transport laughed like a kid opening presents. Someone in radiology cried because the portable ultrasound was the exact model she demoed in a conference ballroom 5 years ago and never touched since. The riders did not push indoors. They moved equipment to the lip of the hospital and passed it hand to hand like a bucket brigade. When one of them recognized a device, he called out where to angle it, how to avoid breaking the delicate protrusions that make machines more than boxes. Arden watched and realized what the woman had already told her: some of them were hers. Nurses. Paramedics who had burned out and come back in a different uniform. Mechanics whose hands had known engines and learned how ventilators breathe. Outside, the convoy kept arriving, a tide of chrome and intention. Inside, monitors blinked awake like animals thawing. A child upstairs coughed less. The oxygen concentrator on pediatrics purred instead of rattling. Lafferty kept trying to look stern and kept getting in the way of carts. At noon, the board called. Arden did not go to the conference room. She answered on speaker from the hallway because triage does not commute. "Dr. Vale," said a voice that carried money, "we're hearing concerning reports about unauthorized donations." "Authorized by breath," Arden said. "By pulse. By the fact that our town refuses to let its hospital fail because the form wasn't blue enough." "That's not how this works," another voice said, older, dripping condiments like good advice. "We cannot be beholden to the people we serve." Arden said. "We are already beholden." Silence on the line. Engines outside, soft like a purr. In the doorway, the man with mercy on his knuckles watched her with the expression of someone who recognizes a cliff and prefers stepping off it to living behind a fence. "Doctor," the first voice said carefully, "you may be placing your career at risk." Arden looked down the corridor at the row of doors where she had coaxed breaths back into bodies, at the scuffed floors that had recorded 1,000 haltings and resumptions of life. If they wanted her fear, she did not have time to feed it. "Noted," she said, and ended the call because a nurse shouted her name from 2 rooms away and medicine outranks worry. Dusk came with its gray shawl and tucked the hospital under it. The riders thinned but did not vanish. Some built a quiet perimeter. Some took coffee from a cafeteria that seemed, for once, proud to be taken from. A small boy in a dinosaur t-shirt waved at a man whose face looked like the inside of an old glove, and the man waved back with the care of someone picking up a newborn. Arden found a sliver of a minute to sit on a crate labeled defibrillator, portable. Her legs ached the way a dancer's ache after the second curtain. She touched the edge of the crate with 2 fingers like a pianist testing an old key. Maya sank beside her. "You made a choice," Maya said. "I always make choices," Arden said. "Tonight I sign one." "You think they'll fire you?" Arden watched a rider carry a box into the sunset and hold the door for a woman with a walker. "If they do, someone will still need a chest tube tomorrow," she said. "That won't change." The forklift beeped as it went backward one last time. Engines idled. The riders began to mount, a slow gathering of purpose. Arden stood because standing felt like assent to the evening's next demand. She scanned the horizon out of habit, the way ER doctors scan even at birthdays and parks, always counting the ways a day can ask for hands. That was when the horizon answered. South, over the river, a second sound rolled toward the hospital. Not bikes. Sirens. Many, braided, urgent. Maya straightened. The deputy lifted his radio. The word multi-casualties slid into the corridor like a knife. Pile up, the deputy said into air that had lost oxygen to fear. Interstate. Tour bus and 3 cars. Fire involved. ETA 6 minutes. Arden didn't think. She moved. Prep all bays, she said. Call every off-duty nurse. Page surgery, ortho, burn. Get the new vents uncrated now. I want the ultrasound parked by Trauma 1. Respiratory, you're with me. Security, I need that loading dock clear 10 seconds ago. She reached Cade's doorway. He looked up, read her face, and understood what men who ride understand, how fast a night can break. Go, he said simply. Do what you do. Engines outside throttled down as if a separate animal had coiled to listen. The riders, watching the doors, began to move not toward the hospital but away from its entrance, opening a corridor with their bodies the way people in churches open aisles for brides and caskets. The first siren cut as the ambulance turned into the bay. Arden lifted her hands to the light. And then the dark shape at the end of the drive resolved itself into something that didn't fit anything she knew. Not an ambulance. Not a semi. A convoy of black SUVs sliding in behind the bikes like a thought you'd hope not to think. The lead vehicle's window rolled down. A face looked out that she recognized from a news story about donations that went sideways in cities where favors came with zip ties. Dr. Vale, the driver called, smiling without warmth. We heard you were in the market for help. We brought our own kind. The ambulances were 30 seconds out. The bikes idled. The forklifts were still. The hospital held its breath. The driver lifted a hand, and the man beside him opened a briefcase stacked not with papers but with envelopes. Let's talk terms, he said. The first ambulance slammed into the bay, and Arden turned because medicine chooses its masters for you. Somewhere behind her, the SUV's doors opened in a chorus of expensive clicks. In the corner of her eye, she saw the rider with mercy on his knuckles step forward and take off his helmet. The night bent at a hinge. The siren's wail cut short. The ER doors slid open. And the smell of burned antifreeze and bus upholstery muscled into the corridor with the gurneys. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. Arden didn't look at the men in the black SUVs or the envelopes or the smile that wanted to be a contract. She looked at the first patient, a teenage girl with soot in the furrows of her palms and singed hair stuck to her temple, eyes skittering like birds. Behind her, a man clutching his forearm where skin had turned the cruel white of fresh burns. Behind him, a driver with the rigid posture of someone afraid to move because moving might let pain catch up. Airway, breathing, circulation, Arden said, and the room remembered its catechism. Trauma 1, 2, and 4. Burn cart to 3. I want the new ultrasound here, plugged in, now. Security held the SUVs at the curb with that particular firm politeness you only see at hospitals and funerals. The riders didn't speak to the men in suits. They formed a wordless lane for stretchers and stood shoulder to shoulder like guardrails made of leather and bone. Engines idled, Elohim. The ultrasound came alive in her hands as if it had been waiting years to arrive in her palm. The probe glided over soot-smeared skin. The image bloomed clean, sliding pleura on one side, a worrying stillness on the other. Left lung down, Arden said. Prepare for chest tube. Ketamine, small dose. We're fast. Maya anticipated her like she always did. Sterile field set. You want the new 28 French from the crate or our old faithful? Arden turned away from a committee and into a hallway that had never asked her for anything she couldn't try to give. The driver at the back had the gall to step into her path with his smile and his envelopes. Doctor, he murmured, before you go save another life, perhaps we could make an arrangement. We like to support heroes. Heroes like to be supported. She looked at the deputy in the doorway. He looked back. The riders, as if rehearsed, adjusted their formation until the aisle to the ER was a line that could not be crossed without raising the cost to something a suit might understand: shame. Later, Arden said, and the word was both dismissal and promise it would never happen. She ran. The boy on the bed was the color of paper. His chest stuttered. The monitor did its hysterical metronome. Arden slid into the space between the endotracheal tube in panic. "Bag him," she said. "Little breaths, quick. I want the new vent here yesterday. Epinephrine drawn up. Check glucose. 60, someone said. Pushing dextrose." The boy's airway was slick with the sticky residue of smoke and fear. Arden suctioned and suctioned again until a clot came free and physics could recommit to their relationship with biology. The ventilator arrived, humming like a promise. When the boy's color returned, first a mean pink, then something warmer, Arden finally let out the breath she'd been holding since the word code had leaped into her ear like a stone into a still pond. "Okay," she whispered, to herself more than to anyone else. "Okay." They stabilized him. The father cried in a hoarse, animal way that made Arden want to find whoever invented statistics and set them on fire. She touched his shoulder with the back of her wrist because gloves make gentleness clumsy. "I don't know your name," the man said through the rattle he couldn't help. "But I'm going to keep breathing because you told my boy to." "Do that," Arden said, and turned to wash her hands because her hands were the only thing she controlled consistently. Word moved through town the way rivers move through places that forget their floodplains. One shop put up a handwritten sign, "Thank you, County Hospital." A diner sent soup that tasted like someone's grandmother still believed simmering solved things. Teenagers arrived with cases of water and the infinite capacity of youth to lift without needing thanks. By evening, the black SUVs had found the limit of their patience. The driver approached Lafferty at the loading dock with the stance of a man who thought spines were for ornaments. It was a conversation disguised as a threat disguised as a friendship. Arden saw the shape of it as she passed with a chart. She didn't stop. She filed the moment in her mental cabinet under, "May require fire later." Cade slept and woke and slept. He tried to bribe a nurse with a story to let him walk the hall, and the nurse traded him a longer story in which he actually healed first. At 10 p.m., the power flickered. It was the kind of flicker that sends a cold hand down the spine of anyone whose life has been measured in heartbeats. Arden's mind leaped ahead of the lights, NICU vents, trauma monitors, the ore halfway through a tibial nail, the elevators, the med refrigerators whispering their cold prayers. "Generator," Maya said, "already moving." The generator belched itself awake, huffed, and steadied. The lights returned, not bright but bruised. Somewhere deep in the hospital's metal belly, a complaint subsided. "Grid problem?" the deputy asked as if the grid were a person he could coax back into sobriety. "Wind," the maintenance chief said, though the wind had been the same all day. "We're okay." They were not okay. They were operating. But language shrinks fear when you need it to fit through doorways. Arden found the man from compliance again because it was a day for collecting reluctant allies. "If I'm on leave," she said, "you'll need to sign off on these ventilators and the new monitors before midnight." Regulatory reporting. He looked at her as if he had woken up in a country where gravity pulled sideways. "You're still, you're not, you should not. Children are breathing," she said. "You get to pick paperwork that makes that legal, or paperwork that explains why we didn't. Choose a story you can live with." He nodded, slowly. "Where do I sign?" "Everywhere," she said, and handed him a pen. He began to move through the hospital with the stunned purpose of someone discovering that forms are not holy scriptures but incantations people made up to feel less small. Near midnight, the auditorium filled again, not with board members but with townspeople. Someone had whispered, someone had posted, someone had texted that the hospital needed witnesses. The sheriff stood in front of them without a podium and said words that felt like a bridge between law and love. "We take care of what takes care of us," he said simply. "Keep it peaceful. Keep it purposeful. Keep the driveway clear. Reporters tried to pry the story open like a sardine tin. They got quotes about machines and miracles and choices. They wanted scandal, they got gratitude and a kind of angry tenderness that didn't fit their lead paragraphs. The SUVs left just before 1 in the morning, tires whispering on wet pavement, not a retreat but a recalculation. The driver leaned out the window long enough to let his smile fold into something colder. "You'll call," he told Lafferty, and it wasn't a question. "You'll get blocked," Maya muttered as if wishing were a firewall. At 2, the hospital exhaled, not relief but an interval. Arden sat on the edge of a supply cart and ate a granola bar with the concentration she usually reserved for central lines. Her hands shook not from fear now but from the after-tremors of decision. The woman with the RN patch appeared beside her like a saint who didn't apologize for showing up late. She handed Arden a paper cup of coffee that tasted like courage cut with burned beans. "Name's June," she said. "Used to work nights in an ICU that thought it was a jungle." "Arden," she said, though June already knew. "We're not out of it." "We're never out of it," June said. "We just get better tires." She tipped her chin toward the window where a handful of bikes still kept vigil like dark horses that refused stables. "They'll be here at dawn, and at lunch, and at the Tuesday after you think you don't need them. Some of them are jerks. A lot of them are the opposite. They remember debts the way old trees remember lightning." "Noted," Arden said, and felt the word find a hook inside her where strength hung its jacket. At 3, a nurse from pediatrics put her head in the doorway. "He's asking for you," she said softly. "Cade?" Arden almost asked, then heard the timbre of the request and understood it belonged to someone smaller. The bus driver's boy opened his eyes like someone surfacing into a gentle storm. The ventilator hissed at his shoulder. The lines were neat, the tape precise. He saw Arden and frowned with the solemnity children use when teleporting between universes. "My dad is scared," he whispered. "Mine was, too," Arden said before remembering that her father had never seen a ventilator and had died on a porch in a different county with birds arguing in the hydrangea. "Grown-ups get scared when big machines help. That's normal. Our job is to be boring until your body gets bored with needing help." He blinked. "Are you a boring doctor?" "I am the most boring person you'll ever meet in here," she said. "It's my finest quality." He thought about that and then, with monumental effort, smiled. "Okay." When she came back down, Maya met her with a look that had suspense braided into it. "They rescinded the leave," she said. "Public statement to be drafted in the morning about process versus people and revisiting procurement policies and some elegant non-apology that means we'll do better because we got caught being small." Arden pressed her eyes with the heel of her hand until stars popped. "Good. Tomorrow we'll teach the board how longs work. They can bring charts." She slept for 48 minutes on a cot in the supply closet, waking with the sudden conviction that she had forgotten to order something essential for the day that had already happened. She stood and her knees felt like doors in old houses. Dawn came blue and tentative. The riders who had stayed through the night began to peel themselves off the curb like stickers from a school notebook. June brought donuts that made the cafeteria's offerings taste like penance. The deputy poured coffee with the pomp of a ceremony. Someone started a slow clap that wasn't for anyone in particular and therefore was for everyone. Cade had a fever. Not a roaring one, but the kind that makes nurses narrow their eyes and doctors tilt their heads. Arden listened to his lungs and didn't like the wet consonants she heard at the bases. "Pneumonia trying to crash the party," she said, charting with a pen that left grooves like plowed fields. "I didn't RSVP," Cade said weakly. "Antibiotics," Arden said. "Incentive spirometry every hour. You can curse me in creative language as long as you pull air like you owe it back rent." He grinned and coughed. "Copy that." As the morning turned into the honest day of ordinary people doing extraordinary things because laziness wasn't an option, a federal sedan rolled into the lot. No lights. No sirens. The woman who stepped out wore a coat that didn't think it was better than anyone and shoes that meant business. She showed a badge to the deputy and then to Lafferty and then to Arden without unnecessary ceremony. "Office of Inspector General," she said. "We got some calls. I'm here to ask if anyone is taking envelopes in exchange for procurement decisions." Arden looked over the inspector's shoulder at the exact moment the black SUVs reappeared on the far edge of the lot like a déjà vu with worse intentions. The driver got out smiling that same rehearsed smile and started toward them with confidence like a cologne. "Timing," Maya muttered. "I swear it's a character with lines." The inspector turned, taking in the scene with one scan that suggested she had stared down uglier rooms and worse smiles. "Is that our problem?" "That's a problem auditioning for a promotion," Arden said. The driver lifted his hand as if to clasp. "Inspector," he said easily, "we're just here to support the community." "Great," the inspector said. "Support looks like tax-deductible receipts in absence of quid pro quo. Anything else looks like an investigation." His smile stayed. His eyes didn't. "We're on the same side." "I'm on the side of boring paperwork," the inspector said. "It wins more quietly." The riders watched without interjecting. June stood with her hands in her jacket pockets, the world's least threatening bouncer. The deputy looked like a man who had decided his spine could be a landmark on a map people used to get home. The driver tried one more angle, turning to Lafferty with a tone crafted to find the weak seam in anyone who'd ever wanted relief. "We can make the monthly shortfalls vanish," he said. "We can make your star doctor comfortable." "Comfortable is a story we tell ourselves instead of practicing medicine," Arden said, surprising herself with the sharpness of her own voice. "We're not for sale." The inspector's card appeared between fingers as if it had materialized. "If you offer or promise consideration in exchange for influence at this facility," she said, "I advise you to do it on camera. It saves my office time." The driver's smile finally collapsed into something that admitted physics. He turned on his heel with a grace that said this had not been his first no. The SUVs retreated, and the exhaust they left behind smelled like surrender and an intention to return as a different problem. By noon, the town had built itself around the hospital like ribs around a set of lungs. A church sent folding chairs. The high school sent volunteers who discovered that holding a door could be a vocation. A welder arrived with a bracket he'd made at dawn to keep a temperamental oxygen tank from cavitating across a floor. The mayor came and said words that tried not to be about elections. The sheriff stood beside Arden at a window and said, "We're going to remember this day." "We have to keep doing it tomorrow," she said. "Memory doesn't ventilate." "Then make it a habit," he said. In the late afternoon, after the last patient from the pileup had been assigned a bed and a plan, after the last crate had been flattened, after the coffee had turned into a sacrament, the riders gathered in a loose semicircle by the flagpole. Kate, stubborn beyond prescription, had convinced a nurse to wheel him out for 5 minutes with an oxygen cannula like a leash. He was pale and beautiful with the ruin of the week on him, grinning at the foolishness of still being alive. The man with mercy on his knuckles raised both hands like a coach calling for a quiet huddle. "We came because one of ours got treated like a person instead of a problem," he said. "We stayed because we remembered that this building is where strangers get turned into neighbors. That's it. That's all." Arden found her throat had thickened. She swallowed until the emotion decided to behave. June stepped forward with a small, battered envelope. "We don't usually do speeches," she said. "But somebody found the words for us." She held the envelope out to Arden. "This is from a dozen shops, 4 clubs, 2 pastures, 1 church, and a roofer who paid in cash because he doesn't trust banks." "Strings attached?" "None." "Pride attached?" "Plenty." Arden took the envelope and didn't open it because meaning wasn't measured there. "We'll account for every screw," she said, and June grinned like someone who enjoyed a good ledger as much as a good ride. The inspector had lingered at the edge of the crowd. She nodded once at Arden with a look that translated to, "If you get in trouble for this, call me first." As the sun slid behind the water tower, the hospital's windows flickered with the small movements of people deciding to live. Arden stood very still and memorized the silhouettes because memory isn't a treatment but it keeps doctors from turning into ghosts. The night returned without sirens and with stars that had the indecency to be pretty. Arden walked the hall one more time and touched doorways with the back of her wrist the way old nurses do for luck. In Cade's room, the fever had bent. The wetness at the bases had thinned, the consonant in his lungs softening to a vowel. "Doc," he said, voice rasping like a record that had been rescued from a fire. "You gonna get fired?" "Probably," she said, but she was smiling. "Probably not. Depends on whether kindness gets a vote." "Then I'm voting," he said. "We'll bring a quorum." "Bring coffee," she said. "Quorums are thirsty." The hospital settled. The riders trickled away with the tender chaos of any goodbye worth making. The deputy did one last slow patrol past the loading dock and found only the echo of work. In the quiet a hospital earns but never owns, Arden finally let herself sit in the chair by the window in the break room where the vending machine made its arguments like a bad poet. She closed her eyes and saw lungs inflating. She opened them and saw her town. It was not healed. It was not safe. It was not a fairy tale. It was a place where engines and prayers and ventilators and stubbornness had converged and agreed to be siblings for a day. Her phone buzzed. A message from the chairwoman, terse and bureaucratically repentant. "The board acknowledges extraordinary circumstances." Review paused. "Gratitude for service. Meeting next week." Arden typed and erased and typed again until the tone felt like a scalpel that cut only what needed cutting. "Thank you. Patient stable. Equipment integrated. Receipts forthcoming. Next week we discuss how to make necessity our policy rather than our exception." She hit send and felt nothing resembling victory. She felt the relief of a person who had managed not to make a mistake she couldn't forgive in a day that offered 1,000 temptations to fail. She thought of the inspector, of June, of the man with mercy on his knuckles, of the deputy discovering his spine was a public resource, of Lafferty discovering that fear was a poor manager. She thought of the driver in the SUV whose smile would return with a different shape. The generator coughed once and then purred. The machines hummed. A child turned in a bed and did not cough. In the room where a firefighter slept, the monitor drew tidy green hills like a country without war. Arden stood and looked down the hall and knew the story wouldn't end clean because medicine never does. It ends in fragments of quiet, in interrupted dinners, in parking lots with handshakes that turn into volunteers. It ends in the next person who walks through a door unable to make air behave. She went to the ER doors because that was where her days always drew their circles. She stood with her palm against the glass. Outside, the dark held its own breath for a second, as if waiting for a cue. A single headlight turned into the lot, too slow for an ambulance, too fast for a visitor. The bike rolled to a stop under the sodium lamp, and the rider took off his helmet with hands that shook. He was young. The patch on his chest was new enough to creak. His eyes were the kind of wild that said a bad decision had just asked to be forgiven. "Doc," he called softly through the glass that divided weather from work. "We need you out back. It's not for us. It's for somebody who tried to buy you." He tilted his head toward the alley where the dumpsters were. "He's bleeding." Arden looked at the empty hallway behind her and the full night ahead and the old oath that lived in her like marrow. She pushed the door, and the cold folded around her like a demand. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.